royal house of Valois was the reigning monarchical house of France from the year 1328 to 1589. They didn't have the raw divine pomp and pageantry of their successors, the Bourbons. They didn't have the almost global conquest and European hegemony of Napoleon. And they certainly didn't have the high-minded ideals and brutal reality of the Revolution. But without them, none of the above would have been possible. So I ask that you join me, Sumatricus, as we explore their entire history across the course of centuries. Together, we shall delve into an often ignored section of French history. We shall explore how they came to power when no one, they themselves included, thought they would. We shall see how they grappled with the English in over 100 years of dynastic war. We shall study how their reforms set the groundwork for France to become a superpower, and we shall understand how they played the great game of politics, war, and nation building. This is the House of Valois. Hello and welcome back, my knights, my chevaliers, my fans of all things history. Last episode we discussed the rise of John II to the throne of France, and in this episode we will talk about his early reign and probably the most defining moment of John II's tenure on the throne of France. So, last time we finished up with him being crowned, and this time we're going to get stuck into the beginning of his reign. So, within the first month of becoming king, John acted swiftly and had Raoul II of Brienne, Count of Eu, bit of an odd thing to be Count of, but, you know, that's the way the cookie crumbles, seized and executed. The reasons remain unclear as to why John did this, but it was rumoured that Raoul had pledged to the English his county of Guienne in exchange for his release. Guienne is in the north of France and directly borders the English Channel and the Low Countries. Now, here we get into the build-up to the restarting of the 100 Years' War. In 1354, John's son-in-law and cousin, Charles II of Navarre, was implicated in the assassination of the Constable of France, Charles de la Cerda. Now, first off, the fact that he's John's son-in-law and cousin really hammers home the point here that we're living in the Game of Thrones era, right? Everybody's interbreeding, it's crazy, right? Now, Charles de la Cerda was the Constable of France. What is the Constable of France? It was the first of the original 5 great officers of the Crown of France. The others being the Seneschal of France, which was sort of a Chief Justice, but more specifically Chief Justice of the Royal Court of Appeals. There was also the Chamberlain, which oversaw the King's Chamber and Wardrobe, but also held important coronation duties. This might seem like a pretty lame thing to be in charge of, right? But access to the king in this time equals power. All authority and all power flows from the king, especially in France. There's no Parliament or House of Lords like there is in England to really deal with. So if you've got this access to the king, you are the deal maker. You are the fella that everybody goes to be like, oh, well, can you hook my kid up with a position in the army? Can you wield the king's influence or put a word in his ear about a religious position, for example? The next office was the butler, which was responsible for the maintenance of the royal vineyards and provisioning the court with wine. Also sounds like a bit of a bummer to our modern sensibilities, but in fact, extremely important for 2 main reasons. One, water was not pure back in this time. They didn't have any understanding of purifying water or waterborne diseases, and people did die a lot from unclean water in this point in time. So it was a lot safer to just drink wine, which was brought over as a fashion by the Romans. So it was considered high class to drink wine, and poorer people drank beer and ale. The purity of this wine and beer would not be anywhere close to anything we have today. Like, there would be these drinks, right? You're still getting a bit of grape and all that kind of stuff in your wine. The next office is the Chancellor, who was responsible for seeing that all royal decrees were enrolled and registered by sundry parlements and provincial courts. So the way this works is that the Chancellor is essentially the logistics of law. The King creates a royal decree, whatever that may be, and the Chancellor ensures that this then becomes codified in the law codes of all the varying areas, and also that this is then further codified by the provincial courts. So it's an incredibly important role, because without the Chancellor, the King's royal decrees just exist as a single piece of paper rather than thousands of copies of that law. Finally, we return to the Constable of France. What was this position? It was the commander-in-chief of the army, and on paper, the highest-ranking nobleman in all of France. So this is a big deal, considering that Charles II of Navarre has apparently been implicated in the assassination of this fella. That's bad news for John. Not only is that an undermining of John's royal authority to have the highest-ranking nobleman and your, right-hand man, for lack of a better term, killed, but also to have that done by a foreign, I don't want to say power, because Navarre is a weak kingdom, if not strategically important, but to have that done by anybody is a real undermining of royal authority. And from what we can tell, Charles de la Cerda was John's favourite at court, so he was his best mate, right? Now, you would think John would act rashly, and he does later on, but right now he makes the right decision, and he's more concerned with the English presence in Gascony, which directly borders the Kingdom of Navarre. So he overlooks Charles II's role in his favourite's death and signs the Treaty of Mantes on the 22nd of February 1354. But the peace does not last, and Charles of Navarre struck up an alliance with Henry of Grosmont, the first Duke of Lancaster. Now, even though Charles was King of Navarre, he was also a powerful landholder in Normandy. So, Charles II is really kicking goals here. He's not only got one strategically important area of land, he's got two, which is really amazing for him, but know your place, small dog. You're not King of France here, right? You're a dude who rules some land in the Pyrenees Mountains. You're not a big deal. You are right now, because you're, strategically important, but, watch yourself. Anyway, in the following year, in 1355, John and Charles signed another treaty, the Treaty of Valgenay, but it fell apart even sooner than the last one did. It's important to realize that treaties and alliances in this time are really, really underpinned by this whole marriage concept, right? If you're not forced to put this union together in via a marriage, it's not really got any staying power. These kings and princes and dukes and all that kind of stuff, they really are pretty changeable. And if this alliance doesn't immediately bear fruit, or isn't a long-standing historical friendship, then it's probably going to fall apart pretty quickly. And it's going to fall apart especially during turbulent times like we have right now during the 100 Years' War. So really locking these alliances down with a marriage is the best way to do it, and another reason why they did do it a lot of the time. And even then, these alliances can fall apart pretty quickly. So all of this came to a head at a banquet on the 5th of April 1356 at the Royal Castle in Rouen. The event was attended by John's oldest son, Dauphin Charles, who hosted, and Charles of Navarre, a number of Norman nobles, and prominent Frenchmen. Just to make this a bit easier, because we got a lot of name double-ups here, I'm going to be referring to John's oldest son, Charles, as the Dauphin, which is essentially the Prince of Wales of France. He's the crown prince, the heir to the throne. And I'll be referring to Charles of Navarre as just Navarre, just so we can all keep their names clear in our head. So they're having this big banquet, casual diplomatic event. They're probably just, more partying than anything else. But suddenly, John II bursts into the banquet, accompanied by his brother, his younger sons, and 100 fully armed knights. John apparently lunged over the table and grabbed Navarre, shouting, "Let no one move if he does not want to be dead with this sword." John's son, the Dauphin, was on his knees pleading with his father to stop, but the king grabbed Navarre by the throat, pulled him out of his chair, all the while yelling, "Traitor, you are not worthy to sit at my son's table." Jeez. Talk about a diplomatic faux pas. I thought the Cold War was bad, but these guys are going nuts. Crikey. John then ordered the arrest of all guests, including Navarre, and had the Count of Harcourt, along with the other Norman nobles, executed in the yard that night while he stood on watching the whole thing. This is incredibly dumb. This is stupidly rash. It's not only going to completely decimate all of John's support in Normandy, which it does, it makes Navarre a dyed-in-the-wool enemy. They're now completely against you. So not only is Normandy swapped completely to the English side, Navarre is also swapped completely to the English side. So you've essentially just given England everything you want and more. And you've also given them a casus belli, a cause to war, because of this diplomatic insult. And I mean, they're looking for one. They want to punch on, right? Now, the only reason we can really figure out for this is that John really couldn't get over the assassination of the Constable of France. And this was his extremely rash, emotional, passionate response to this event. It's a crime of passion, really. And this, further feeds into our modern sensibility of like, oh, maybe this fella shouldn't be in charge of the whole country as an absolute monarch. So, in response to this event, that same year, Edward the Black Prince, what a title, what a nickname, you'd love to see it, son of Edward III, took an army and launched a Shavanshy. A Shavanshy is a medieval maneuver in which an army raids and burns its enemy's land. Edward the Black Prince was the Prince of Wales, so he was the Crown Prince of England, and he's known to history as the Black Prince, as I shall be referring to him as, because it's a great title and also helps us separate him and his father, who have the same name. Cheers for that, people in the medieval era. In response to the Black Prince's Shavanshy, John II raised an army to pursue, and on the 19th of September 1356, the two met near Poitiers. John was confident in victory. His army was probably twice the size of the Black Prince's, but he didn't immediately attack. While the two armies were waiting, a papal legate was dispatched. A papal legate is essentially somebody who is not the Pope, but has authority to act in the moment given to them by the Pope. Usually a cardinal, if not a cardinal, at minimum an archbishop. The papal legate went back and forth between both armies trying to negotiate a truce, but it wasn't really happening. There is debate over whether the Black Prince wanted to fight at all. Apparently he offered John his wagon train, which was full to the brim with all the loot that he'd stolen during this Shavanshy, and the Black Prince had promised not to fight France for 7 years. Normally, to our modern sensibilities, you would be like, oh, well, he's lying. But of course, in the medieval age, with all this chivalric code of honor stuff, a promise is a promise, and your word is your life. Some sources claim that the Black Prince even offered to return Calais to the French crown in exchange for not fighting. A smarter man would have 100% taken this deal. Getting Calais back, that would have been a huge victory for France. John, unfortunately, is not a smarter man, so he counters by demanding that the Black Prince and 100 of his best knights surrender themselves to him as hostages. Obviously, this wasn't going to happen. Land and money are nothing compared to a knight's honor, right? These guys, they're born in the lap of luxury. They have never had to worry for a thing in their lives, and they 100% don't really understand that money and land is vastly more important than them, and their chivalric code of honor demands that they would never surrender. They would surrender if they were defeated in battle, because obviously the human instinct to survive takes over at that point. But before the battle, that ain't going to happen, and especially not the Black Prince. The Black Prince, was at the Battle of Crécy that we talked about in previous episodes. So this guy has essentially been fighting in pitched hand-to-hand combat since he was only old enough to be in year 7, right? I mean, these people are hardened warriors, so he's sure as hell not going to surrender himself just because you asked him to, right? On the day of the battle, John II and 17 knights from his personal guard dressed identically. This was done to confuse the enemy, who would do everything possible to capture the sovereign on the field. As I've spoken about many times before, capturing the sovereign, it's a big deal. So obviously this is a body double ploy. So John will be able to be involved in the battle, lead his army from the front, which was expected at this time, but still be able to keep relative safety. Now, even with a larger force, the absolute Mac Daddy of the 100 Years' War, the big kahuna, the English longbow, carried the day and destroyed the French knightly host, causing them to retreat. So, once again, the equivalent of a machine gun absolutely dominates these guys on horseback. Again, which you think the French would learn from, but they really don't. So, what I want to do here is take a little tangent as to why English archery is so effective. So the English longbow, first of all, is an extremely powerful weapon. It's able to launch an arrow so hard and fast that it can penetrate plate armor, which is, massive. Now, these fellas who are the core of this archery unit of the army for the English, they're not peasants who have just been drawn up. These guys they're not professional soldiers, but they are expert archers, first and foremost, and on every Sunday, it's mandated by the king that you have to go practice with a longbow for at least a couple of hours. These guys are so good at archery that they've discovered skeletons of them recently in which their preferred bow shooting arm is visibly stronger on the bone than their other arm. So, I mean, these guys are hardcore. They're really, really the super soldier of the day. This is also sort of a David versus Goliath situation in terms of perception. So these archers aren't noblemen. They're not rich. They don't have the money to buy a horse or buy plate armor. So every time the French knights go up against them, they always have that classist attitude of like, oh, well, I'm a nobleman. I'm born and bred for battle. I'm better than these guys. So they're not only superior to the French knights, they're also being underestimated, right? Which is a deadly combo. Now, despite John's body doubles, he was captured as the English surged forth to finish the French force. He did fight with valor, though. He apparently wielded a large battle axe, but his helmet was knocked off after suffering a head blow. Surrounded by Englishmen, he fought on until Denis de Montbacu, a French exile who fought for the English, approached him. Sire, Montbacu said, I am a knight of Artois. Yield yourself to me, and I will lead you to the Prince of Wales, obviously being the Black Prince. John surrendered himself by handing Montbacu his glove, and that night he dined in the red silk tent of his enemy, with the Black Prince attending to him personally, which obviously is a show of civility, which further feeds into this code of chivalry, right? John was taken to Bordeaux, which is on the west of France, bordering the Atlantic Ocean, and from there he was taken to England. So the unthinkable has happened. The King of France has been captured, and this is seriously bad news. The Battle of Poitiers was one of the major military disasters, not just for France, but for the entire medieval age. I mean, the whole world was reeling at how badly this had gone for France. This is especially bad for the French psyche, the French zeitgeist, because France is known as the home of knights, right? To see knights get stomped this hard multiple times, and for the king to be captured, is just an absolute black mark on the chivalric legacy that is explicitly empowered in France, and especially in the noble strata of France. I mean, France was home to some of the most amazing cavalry charges and battle victories that's ever occurred. Say, for example, Charles Martel, who fought off the Islamic invasion through Spain. I mean, these knights and various dukes and nobles of France who conducted themselves in these knightly ways are legendary in France, and especially in the mind of these nobles. I mean, these guys are like the Superman, the Thor, the Marvel Avengers of the of France at this point in time. So to fail this spectacularly is really bad news. We will finish up with John's reign in the next episode, and until we get there, geez, pour one out for France. They're really getting stomped at this point in time, but rest assured, they will come back. You can't keep a good nation down. So until then, it's been a pleasure to record this episode for you. I hope you enjoyed it. I've been Smatricus, and I will see you next time on the House of Valois.